When I bought the 10-acre spread just outside of Redstone Valley, I thought I'd finally found peace. The rolling hills, golden in the afternoon sun, and the scent of pine from the distant forest made it feel like my slice of heaven after years of city noise and HOA politics. I moved there to get away from rules about mailbox colors and lawn heights, but little did I know that the Homeowners Association of the neighboring subdivision Sunset Ridge Estates was about to make me relive every nightmare of suburban control. My property wasn't part of their HOA. It was an old ranch parcel that existed long before their neighborhood even broke ground. Still, my ranch sat right off the only private road they maintained, and that little detail was enough to give them the illusion of power. It all began the day I decided to replace the tired old wire fence with something a little more personal. My late wife, Amy, had always loved bright colors and ornate designs, so in her memory, I built a fence that would have made her smile. A tall, wrought iron masterpiece painted deep red with golden accents curling into vines and stars, running along the front of the property like a ribbon of art. To me, it wasn't gaudy, it was beautiful and meaningful. But to the HOA, it was an eyesore. I knew I was in trouble the moment a convoy of SUVs pulled up, led by a woman in an oversized sun hat and pearls, even though it was 90 degrees out. "Excuse me," she said, stepping out as though she owned the ground she stood on. "I'm Carol Mendez, president of the Sunset Ridge HOA. We've received complaints about this structure." She said the word like she was talking about graffiti. I wiped the sweat from my brow and smiled politely. "This fence is on my land, ma'am. I don't recall asking for permission." Her lips tightened. "The aesthetic of this area is important to our community. Your property borders the entrance to Sunset Ridge. Your fence affects property values." I chuckled softly. "So does arrogance, but you don't see me trying to regulate that." Her eyes narrowed. The rest of her committee, three men in polo shirts clutching clipboards, shifted awkwardly. She handed me a folder. "This is a notice of violation." I didn't even take it. "You have no jurisdiction over me." She frowned, clearly not used to resistance. "We'll see about that," she said and drove off. I didn't realize then that she meant it literally. Within a week, I started getting letters from the county inspector claiming my fence violated community standards. I called the county and learned there were no such codes in the rural zone my ranch occupied. The letters were fake, printed on HOA letterhead, signed by Compliance Officer Carol Mendez. I could have laughed if it weren't so pathetic. Still, she escalated. Every few days, I'd find anonymous notes taped to my gate. "Take it down. You're ruining our view, gaudy freak." Then came the sabotage. Someone dumped paint thinner along the base of the fence, stripping off a section of gold leaf. I caught two teenagers one night, kids from the HOA's subdivision, trying to pry off a decorative panel. When I walked out with a flashlight, they bolted, leaving behind a note that said, "Karen says you'll regret this." I called the sheriff, but without video proof, nothing could be done. That was the moment I decided I wasn't going to take their bullying lying down. I started digging. The road that ran from the main highway to my ranch, Sunset Ridge Drive, wasn't a county road. It had been built by the HOA's developer years ago, but there was one oddity. When the original ranch land was subdivided, a 60-foot strip of that road frontage still belonged to the ranch's parcel. That meant the HOA's only entrance technically crossed private property, my property. I called the title office, double-checked the survey, and confirmed it. They'd built their gated entrance right across land they didn't own, and the deed hadn't been corrected since the 1980s. It was the legal equivalent of a loaded gun sitting at my feet, and I hadn't even realized it. So, when Carol came storming back 2 weeks later with a clipboard and a threat, "Either take that fence down or we'll file for an injunction," I smiled and said, "Actually, Carol, I've been doing some reading. Seems your HOA road crosses into my ranch by about 60 feet. You've been trespassing for 30 years. Her face went pale. "That's ridiculous." "Not according to the deed records," I said calmly. "Tell you what, I'll let your folks keep using it if you stay off my back about the fence." She looked like she'd bitten into a lemon. "You wouldn't dare enforce that." "You'd be surprised what I'd dare." She stormed off, muttering something about lawyers, and I knew the war had officially begun. Over the next month, she sent code inspectors, realtors, and even a landscaping contractor to evaluate my fence. None had authority, all were bluffing, and I recorded every encounter. But what pushed me over the edge was the day they blocked my delivery truck at the HOA gate, refusing to let it through because, as the guard put it, Mr. Thornton's ranch is not an approved property. Approved property. That phrase stuck with me all night like a splinter. They thought they could control everything that touched their neighborhood, even the public road they didn't own. So, I made a decision that would change everything. I went down to the county office, filed a purchase request for the unclaimed easement sections of the road adjoining my land, and by the end of the week, I owned the entire strip leading into Sunset Ridge. I didn't tell them right away. I just waited until the ink was dry, the deed filed, and the private property signs delivered. When Carol and her committee drove out to confront me again the next Friday, they found my ranch gate closed, the fence shining bright under the sun, and a brand new metal sign bolted right to the road entrance. Private road, no trespassing, owner J. Thornton. Carol slammed on her brakes, so hard dust billowed across the hood of her car. Her pearl necklace rattled as she stumbled out. "You can't do this," she shouted. I smiled from my porch. "Actually, I can, and I have the deed to prove it." The look on Carol's face that morning was something I'll never forget. A perfect mix of disbelief, rage, and panic as she stared at that shiny new sign marking what was now my road. The rest of her HOA board had pulled up behind her in their SUVs, stepping out one by one as if their presence alone could intimidate me. I sipped my coffee on the porch, calm as a stone, while they huddled together whispering, no doubt realizing that for the first time, they weren't the ones in control. When Carol finally approached, her voice was trembling with that brittle authority people use when they're losing ground. "You can't legally restrict access to Sunset Ridge," she declared, waving a folder stuffed with papers. "That road is part of our community." I grinned. "You might want to check the county registry, Carol. I own this entire stretch now, every inch from the highway to your fancy little gate." Her jaw clenched. "That's impossible." I walked down the steps, handed her a photocopy of the deed, and pointed to the highlighted section that read Access Easement, terminated by transfer of ownership. "Seems your developer forgot to renew the easement rights when they filed your HOA charter. The land reverted to the original parcel owner, which was me after I bought the ranch. You've been trespassing for decades." Carol's lips moved, but no words came out. Behind her, one of the board members, a tall, balding man named Steve who always acted like her enforcer, spoke up. "We'll sue you." I shrugged. "Go ahead. You'll lose. But while you're filing papers, your residents might want to know they're driving on private property every day without permission. Technically, that's trespassing." I turned and started walking back toward the porch, leaving them speechless in the dust. They drove off soon after, no doubt calling an emergency board meeting. That was fine by me. I had work to do. Over the next few days, I installed a heavy-duty steel gate across the entrance to the road, complete with an electronic keypad and a camera feed that linked straight to my phone. I left it open during the day, at first, just to see what they'd do. Predictably, they started a smear campaign. Flyers appeared on mailboxes around town calling me a threat to the community and a vindictive neighbor. One even claimed I was trying to extort the HOA for money. That one made me laugh. Extort them? I didn't need their money. I just wanted my peace and a little respect for my rights. But Carol couldn't leave it alone. She started parking her car at the entrance every morning, glaring at me as I left for work, as though her presence might guilt me into compliance. Then, one afternoon, I came home to find a county truck parked by my gate. An inspector was measuring the road, shaking his head. "They called you too?" I asked. He nodded, said you were blocking a public access route. "But this isn't county property, it's yours, all right. I'm just here to confirm it." When I thanked him and he left, I noticed Carol standing across the street again, hands on her hips. I waved cheerfully. She didn't wave back. That night, I locked the gate for the first time, not to be cruel, just to prove a point. Within 20 minutes, my phone started buzzing. First a text from an unknown number, "You're making a mistake." Then another, "We'll call the sheriff." Then a third, "People can't get home. You'll be sorry." I ignored them all. Around 9 p.m., I saw headlights flashing at the gate. Dozens of cars were backed up, residents honking and shouting. I went out with a flashlight, holding up my deed like a badge. "Private road," I shouted, "not a public street. You'll need an access agreement to pass." The crowd roared back with anger, people yelling that I was trapping them, threatening to call the police, and even one man screaming that his kids had school in the morning. "Should have talked to your HOA about that," I said calmly. They knew this day was coming. It wasn't long before the sheriff arrived. Deputy Callahan, a good man I'd known for years. He got out of his cruiser, sighed, and walked over. "Evening, Jack. Mind telling me what's going on?" I handed him the paperwork. "Just exercising my rights, Sheriff. The HOA's been harassing me for months. I bought the road they use for access. It's private property now." He looked over the documents, scratched his chin, and turned to the crowd. "He's right, folks. Not much I can do unless he's breaking a law, which he isn't." The collective gasp from the residents was music to my ears. Carol shoved her way to the front. "You can't be serious," she screamed. "This affects dozens of families." Callahan looked at her flatly. "Then you should have checked your records before harassing the man about his fence." He gave me a half smile before driving off, leaving Carol fuming in the dark. The next morning, I woke up to find someone had spray painted my gate with the words "selfish loser" in red. I installed motion lights and 2 more cameras that day. They wanted a war. I was happy to oblige. I drafted a formal access lease agreement and emailed it to the HOA office. It was simple. Pay $500 a month for maintenance and liability coverage, and I'd grant them 24/7 access. Within an hour, I got a furious response from Carol. "This is extortion," she wrote. I replied with 2 words: "Private property." They refused to pay, of course, but when a few residents couldn't get to work because I kept the gate locked during a storm, the anger turned inward. Suddenly, the same people who once cheered Carol's crusade were demanding she fix the problem. Rumors started swirling that several homeowners were threatening to sue the HOA board for negligence. Meanwhile, I quietly kept my ranch running, painting the fence even brighter than before, a deep crimson now, shimmering in the sun like a challenge. Within a week, the pressure inside Sunset Ridge reached a boiling point. Their own residents started organizing meetings without the board, questioning why their president had spent months fighting a man who legally owned the only road to their homes. I heard through the grapevine that some even demanded Carol resign. Then came the breaking point. One evening, Carol showed up at my ranch alone, no pearls, no clipboard, just desperation in her eyes. "Jack," she said softly, "you've made your point. Can we talk?" I invited her onto the porch, poured her a cup of coffee, and waited. She explained that residents were furious, the board was collapsing, and property values were plummeting. "They want me gone," she admitted. "You win." I looked her straight in the eye. "I never wanted to win, Carol. I just wanted to be left alone. You pushed me." She sighed, tears glistening in the porch light. "Can we make a deal?" she asked. I leaned back in my chair, considering. "Maybe. But first, you're going to stand in front of your HOA and admit you were wrong. You're going to tell them I own this road, that you forged county letters, and that you harassed me for no reason." Her mouth fell open. "You're asking me to humiliate myself." "No," I said. "I'm asking you to tell the truth." Carol stared at me like I'd just asked her to walk barefoot across broken glass. The pride that had fueled her every action was cracking under the weight of reality, but she wasn't ready to crumble completely. "Jack," she said, her voice trembling but stubborn, "I can't admit that to them. They'll destroy me." I leaned forward, my elbows resting on my knees, the steam from my coffee curling between us. "They're already destroying you, Carol. You've lost their trust, their patience, and probably their respect. The only thing you can do now is own your mistake. Otherwise, you'll keep digging that hole deeper." She turned her gaze toward the distant lights of Sunset Ridge, flickering faintly beyond the trees. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered. I was just trying to protect the community. By lying? By harassing a man who just wanted to build a fence. I asked quietly. You can't protect people by controlling them. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The night was thick with crickets and the low hum of the wind through the pines. Then Carol nodded once, slowly, like someone signing a contract with herself. Fine, she said. I'll do it. I'll call a meeting tomorrow night. I didn't gloat or smile. I just said, good, and stood to see her off. But as her car disappeared down the newly locked gate, I couldn't help wondering if she'd actually go through with it, or if she was plotting her next move. The next day was eerily quiet. No cars idled at my gate, no angry messages lit up my phone, no signs of retaliation. It was almost unsettling, like the calm before a storm. Then, around sunset, I got a call from one of the residents, an older man named Howard who had always waved politely when passing by. Jack, he said, cautiously, you might want to come down to the HOA hall tonight. Things are getting tense. Tense how? I asked. He hesitated. Let's just say Carol's got some explaining to do, and people are angry. Against my better judgment, I drove down there. The HOA hall sat at the end of their neatly trimmed boulevard, a small building that looked more like a country club lobby than a community office. As I pulled up, I saw dozens of cars lined along the street and people spilling out onto the lawn, voices raised, tempers flaring. Inside, the atmosphere was electric, half chaos, half courtroom. Carol stood at the front of the room, clutching a folder, while residents shouted over each other. You said it was his fault, one man barked. My wife can't even get to work, yelled another. A woman waved a letter in the air. You told us the county was on our side. Carol raised her hands, trying to calm them. Please, please, just let me explain. But no one wanted to listen. That's when someone noticed me in the doorway. The room fell into a stunned hush. Every head turned. I almost laughed at the sight of Carol's face draining of color. Mr. Thornton, said one man from the back, is it true? Do you really own the road? I nodded. Yes, sir. Deeds in my name. County confirmed it. Your HOA's been using private property without legal access for 30 years. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. A few people turned toward Carol, demanding answers. Is that true? You lied to us? Did you fake those letters? The pressure was boiling over. Carol looked like she might faint. Finally, she raised the folder above her head. Yes, she said, her voice cracking. It's true. I made a mistake. The road belongs to Mr. Thornton. I tried to fight him because I didn't want to admit we were wrong. The silence that followed was suffocating. For a few seconds, all you could hear was the hum of the ceiling fan and someone coughing near the back. Then, slowly, the crowd erupted, some in disbelief, others in fury. A man stood up, pointing an accusing finger. You forged county letters, Carol. That's fraud. Another shouted, you made us all look like fools. A woman near the front burst into tears. I didn't move. I just stood there, letting them vent, letting the truth settle like dust after an explosion. Carol sank into her chair, her face buried in her hands. Finally, when the noise died down enough for my voice to carry, I spoke. I don't blame all of you, I said. I know most of you had nothing to do with this. But your board crossed a line when they tried to bully me into submission. I gave them a chance to back off, and they didn't. So I took back what was mine. A few people nodded in agreement, others looked ashamed. Then Howard, the man who had called me, raised his voice. What happens now, Jack? Are we stuck without access forever? I looked at Carol, who was trembling silently, then back at the crowd. That depends, I said. If you're willing to handle things civilly, I'll open the road again under a legal agreement. You pay a small monthly fee for maintenance, less than you'd spend on one of those fancy flower beds, and everyone gets access. But if this HOA keeps harassing me, it stays closed. The room buzzed with whispers. One resident shouted, I'd rather pay the fee than keep living like prisoners. Another added, it's better than dealing with her nonsense. The tide had turned. For the first time, I saw cracks forming in the HOA's iron control. Carol looked up, eyes glassy. "They'll fire me," she whispered. I nodded. "Probably. But at least you'll walk out honest." The meeting dissolved into chaos again. People forming groups, debating details, venting months of frustration. I took that as my cue to leave. As I walked out, Carol caught up to me at the door. "Jack," she said softly, "I'll sign whatever you need. I can't fix the past, but maybe I can make this right." I nodded once. "Do that, and I'll reopen the gate." She hesitated. "You're not going to tell anyone about the forged letters, are you?" I met her eyes. "That depends on how honest you are from here on out." She gave a weak smile, nodded, and walked back inside to face the people she deceived. The next morning, I unlocked the gate for the first time in days. The road was quiet, sunlight glinting off the fresh paint on my red and gold fence. Cars began trickling through, cautious at first, as if expecting another surprise. A few residents waved sheepishly. I waved back. For the first time since this whole mess began, it felt like the valley might finally breathe again. But I knew Carol and I knew the HOA. They wouldn't go down that easy. Somewhere deep down, I could feel it. This was only a ceasefire, not the end of the war. For a few brief weeks, peace settled over Redstone Valley like a soft morning fog. The air was calm, the road was open, and I began to think that maybe, just maybe, the whole HOA debacle had finally come to an end. I spent my mornings tending to the horses, repainting the barn, and sitting by the fence that had started it all, admiring the way it glowed under the rising sun. But deep down, a part of me stayed wary. You don't spend months in a war of wills with someone like Carol Mendez and expect her to disappear quietly. Sure enough, one crisp autumn afternoon, I got my answer. A letter arrived, stamped with the HOA's logo, not from Carol, but from their new interim president, a smug man named Philip Crane. He claimed the HOA's legal team had reviewed the road ownership and determined that my deed was invalid due to improper transfer. In other words, they were trying to undo the purchase. I couldn't help but laugh. They still hadn't learned that bluffing doesn't work when the other side actually knows the law. But this time, I wasn't going to waste another ounce of energy reacting defensively. I decided to finish this fight once and for all, and do it in a way that would leave no room for doubt, no loopholes, no comeback. I started by hiring a surveyor, an independent one with no ties to the county or the HOA. He mapped every inch of the road, from the asphalt to the drainage ditches, and confirmed what I already knew. The entire 60-foot stretch from the highway to the HOA's gate was mine, down to the soil. Then I called in a construction crew. For 3 days, heavy equipment rumbled up and down my drive as workers laid fresh gravel and installed new fencing along the borders of the road. The HOA residents watched nervously from their porches, whispering, filming, speculating. On the 4th day, when the work was done, I unveiled the sign I'd been waiting to put up. Private property, access restricted. Non-resident permits available through ranch office. Below it was a note in smaller letters. HOA board members prohibited pending legal review. That last line wasn't for show. It was a message, one Philip and his lawyers would understand perfectly well. As expected, they erupted. I got another letter the next morning, this time full of threats. Lawsuits, injunctions, complaints to the county. They even tried to accuse me of endangering public safety by restricting their emergency access. That one made me grin, because I'd already anticipated it. I'd gone to the fire chief and sheriff's office the week before, shown them my ownership documents, and signed special access agreements with both departments. Their trucks and patrol cars could pass freely through the gate at any time. I wasn't blocking safety, I was blocking arrogance. When the HOA realized I'd covered my bases, they went quiet again, but not before trying one last desperate stunt. One night around 2 a.m., I was woken by a faint metallic rattle outside. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped onto the porch just in time to catch 2 figures fumbling at the gate lock. They froze under the beam, faces pale, teenagers again, but this time with bolt cutters in hand. Whose idea was this? I demanded. One of them stammered. Mr. Crane told us to. He said it wasn't legal for you to lock the road. I sighed, called the sheriff, and had the kids' parents pick them up. The next morning, I drove straight into town and filed a trespassing complaint, this time naming Philip Crane and the HOA as the responsible parties. That move sent shockwaves through their community. Suddenly, residents were realizing their new president was no better than the last. Within a week, 3 board members resigned, and the HOA's lawyer withdrew from representing them. Word spread that Philip had used HOA funds to try to bribe a county clerk into altering the road record, a stunt that backfired spectacularly when the clerk reported it. The county launched an inquiry, and the HOA found itself drowning in fines and bad publicity. Local news picked up the story. HOA faces legal trouble over private road dispute. They even sent a camera crew to interview me. Standing by my now famous red and gold fence, I told them the truth. This was never about revenge. I said, it was about boundaries, literal and moral. You can't bully people into obedience and expect them to stay quiet forever. That interview went viral across the county, and by the end of the month, Sunset Ridge's reputation was in ruins. Property values dropped, several homeowners put their houses up for sale, and the HOA board voted to dissolve itself temporarily pending reorganization. Carol, to her credit, kept her word. She resigned quietly, moved out of the subdivision, and sent me a handwritten letter apologizing for everything. She even included a check for $5,000, writing that it was a gesture of goodwill for the damage and stress she'd caused. I never cashed it, but I kept the letter. As for the road, I didn't keep it closed forever. Once the dust settled, I reopened it under a proper lease agreement with a new homeowners association that replaced Sunset Ridge, this one run by people who actually understood the concept of respect. They pay a modest fee each month for maintenance, and in return, I keep the road smooth and safe. Every so often, one of the residents stops by to thank me or to joke about the Great Road War. I always smile, but inside, I remember every sleepless night, every threat, every sneer from Carol and her cronies. They thought they could control me because I was one man on a ranch, an outsider to their perfect little world. But I'd proven that one determined person with the truth and a deed can bring an entire machine to its knees. The final irony came a few months later when the county approached me about buying the road outright to make it public again. They offered a fair price, enough to cover all my costs and then some. I agreed on one condition: the section directly in front of my ranch would remain private property, fenced off and reserved exclusively for my access. They accepted, and so, even though Sunset Ridge regained their road, they'd forever have to drive past a reminder of the man they tried and failed to intimidate. My red and gold fence stood proudly at the entrance, gleaming under the sun, a symbol of freedom and defiance. Sometimes I sit on the porch and watch their cars pass by, the same people who once glared at me now nodding respectfully as they drive through. It's funny how quickly people's opinions change once they realize they were following the wrong leader. The HOA had blocked my ranch because they thought my fence was too gaudy. Maybe it was, but it turned out to be more than decoration. It was a line in the sand. They crossed it, and I taught them what happens when you try to control the wrong person. I didn't just win the fight, I rewrote the rules. And every time that golden fence catches the morning light, I remember the day they tried to take my peace and how I bought their only road and took it back tenfold.